Hey everybody, here's part one of our Dean Russo paintings. We're going to be using the grid method to draw our photograph. Here are a couple examples that I've created in the past. This example is of my dog Petey, and I created this so you can see one completed, and you can also see the process of me completing another. This one is Luna. We rescued her from the shelter 2 years ago. And what you can see on my photograph is there is a grid with 3 boxes across. Same with my paper. That's also 3 boxes across and 4 boxes down. On the photographs that I have presented to you for you to choose your own dog, you also will see the same number of squares that you will on the paper that I sent home. Now, what you are going to be doing is working one square at a time, and I always start from the bottom. So let's start in the bottom left corner. There's nothing there, so I'm moving on to the middle bottom square. And very carefully, you're going to take your time and draw anything that you see. So I see a little bit of hair covering part of her collar, so I'm going to draw that. I'm going to draw the little buckles that I see. And when you're drawing, I really want you to draw lightly. So I draw very light, sketchy lines because you're going to want to be able to erase anything you can. Something that I do is I'll make a little tiny tick mark in the center of these boxes on both my paper and the photograph. And what that does is help me line things up. So if I know where the middle of that little square is and I look at whatever line or shape I see, it helps me place where it's supposed to go inside that square. Now I'm done with the bottom row, so I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to do the same thing where I just make these tiny little tick marks right in the middle. Again, you don't have to do this, but I find it really helps me line things up and figure out how big things need to be. Because my photograph is a lot smaller than my paper. That means we're enlarging things, so we're drawing everything a little bit larger. I'm going to start with the line I see of her cheek or the side of her face. I see that it starts to curve a little bit and moves on into the next box. Her nose. About half of it is in this first box. When I draw the nostrils, I think of a comma shape. So I draw a little shape that just reminds me of what a comma looks like. So from the outside of the nose working my way inward, I draw that little comma. This one kind of looks like a little bit of a half moon. I'm going to draw these little light lines just to show that darker area around her snout while I continue to draw the line of her cheek. Any little line or wrinkle you see, you can lightly add those. And I'm just going to look back and forth at my photograph and try to put as many details as I can on my paper. Here I'm going to draw a couple of those little wrinkles, so I'll just draw some lines. I'll draw little bits of fur to add more texture to my drawing. So sometimes you don't have to draw straight lines. Try to do some very nice sketchy lines to give the appearance of fur. It always helps. Add the last bit of buckle on her collar. The line to show where her body ends. It goes right off the paper. Moving up the next row, I'm going to start over here with her eye. Now this is where you really want to take your time and really look at your picture. I'm going to first continue drawing the side of her head. It starts to go out a little bit where the ear is. There's going to be a lot of weird lines and shapes we may see in the ears because there's going to be a lot of folds and bends. So just look at the curves of these lines. Look at the shapes that you see and try to draw them as best you can. And it's okay if you mess up. Just keep trying. Before I go and do the eyes, I'm going to continue the rest of her little head shape. It kind of swoops down a little bit, goes back up, and then it goes back down. Now when you do the eye, something I do is try to move it as close to my drawing as I can, and I can even cover up some of it to help me see better. Now notice I'm drawing the eye double the size I see it, so make sure you're drawing it bigger. When I draw eyes, I like to think of the shape of an almond, or maybe like a football. It's not going to be a perfect circle. This is the socket of the eye, which the eyeball would sit in. So I draw this shape before I go in and start drawing the circle. That will be the actual eyeball. Now notice I did not draw an entire circle. I only drew like half the circle, right? I did not draw it at the top because part of that eyelid is going to be covering a little bit of that eyeball. What I also do after I draw the eyeball in that eye socket is I'm going to draw a smaller circle, which is for the pupil, or the black part of the eye. On these photographs, you may see a little white speck. So sometimes I draw this tiny little white circle. Sometimes there may be two. I kind of did a half moon shape. But then when I go in there and color it, I can help make that eye look a little more realistic. I'm going to add any details I see on Luna's face, so her different markings, different fur. Sometimes I draw these little lines you'll see on Peter here. I draw these little, I call them facial expression lines, so it kind of shows the facial expression that the dog may be making. Now, what I want you to notice is if I drew a line straight across from the top eye, the second eye is a lot lower, so I'm definitely going to be making the eye a little lower than the first one. So I'm going to make these little marks again to help me, so make a little tiny mark in the middle of your grid. And I know that now this eye is going to be lower. It's going to be like right down here in this corner. So again, I'm going to start with my almond shape. I'll speed it up a little bit here. Okay, start with my almond. Basically, it's two curved lines with that circular shape. That's not a complete circle because part of it is covered by the eyelid. Then I go in and I make the little pupil. Remember, I'm drawing super, super lightly, so I can erase anything. Draw the little facial expressions. You don't have to do this, but I like to do it. It helps give a little bit more emotion or character to the dog. And the last thing I have to finish up here is adding these tiny little markings and her last ear. So again, I will draw the side of her head, so where her head actually ends. It's a little bit of a curvy line here. So just look at the curves of the lines you see. Pay attention to where you see them inside the square. Look for shapes. And just really look at those lines. Okay, so now I am done. I'm going to trace everything. So take a Sharpie if you have one, black marker if you don't, but a Sharpie is awesome. Erase everything. This is why I say do it super lightly. You're erasing the grid too. Okay, so for the eyes, Dean Russo stated, each piece begins with a bold ink outline. I then focus on the eyes of my subject. The eyes are perhaps the most important element in a piece. They hold every part of the subject's characteristics. And here's an example. You can see those eyes, they look so realistic. So he focuses on these eyes, trying to make them look as real and genuine as he can. I want you to notice on my example, it's a lighter brown on the inside of the eye and a little darker towards the outside. So I'm going to show you how I do this. I'm going to start with a light brown and lightly shade in that eyeball, but not the pupil and not that little white spot. And I'm slowly going to build up darker values towards the edge of the eyeball. And if you have to clean it up a little bit with your eraser, you can. You want to try to get this as neat as you can possibly do it. And what I do is I take a couple of different browns. So maybe I'll take a different type of brown towards the outside especially. Press down a little heavier. I'm going to come back to the brown, but first I'm going to trace those little white specks so we can see the shine of the eye. And I'm going to press down pretty hard with this black colored pencil to color in the pupil. The pupil should be the darkest part of the eye. Something I'm also going to do is lightly go over my brown with this black. I'm not putting a lot of pressure down, but you can already see that that's turning into a little bit of a darker brown. Sometimes I color inward, from the outside inward towards the pupil, and sometimes that helps leave a nice texture for the eyeballs, and leaving that little white part empty. Now, I call this Luna's eyeliner, so she does not have just this big white empty area around her eye. It's pretty dark, as you can see in the photo. So what I'm going to do is around the eyeball, I'm going to add her little eyeliner. Not all dogs have this, but this is just something that Luna has. So I'm gonna try to make it look like the photo as I can. Now the same thing here, I'm gonna just do it backwards. I'm gonna first color in the pupil, leaving the little white speckles white. Do a little bit of a black outline before I go in with the brown. Remember, I'm just trying to get it to look from dark brown to light brown within the eyeball. Add her a little bit of eyeliner. Help look a little bit more realistic. Now, something that I like to do, you don't have to do this, but I take a skinny Sharpie and I add a couple little tiny markings, little bits of texture of hair throughout the drawing. This is something when you look at Dean Russo's examples, he does a lot of this. I did not do this in previous times when I've done this assignment, but I'm gonna do it now because I think it really adds a little bit more, it brings it to life. And next week we are going to move on to part 2, where we get to add some color and designs just like Dean Russo. Take your time with this, have fun, and I can't wait to see how these come out.